So, lads, today we're going to be talking about something crazy. Something absolutely crazy. So, during the game, we saw here, the Fever players celebrating. I would assume, based on the reaction, that this was after the Lexi Hull steal.
What just happened? Caitlin Clark just got slapped with a fine by the WNBA right in the middle of her playoff run. The league's biggest star, the player dragging in the ratings, punished at the exact moment she should be celebrated. And here's the kicker. It wasn't for anything you'd expect. Not for fighting, not for breaking rules, but for something so petty. Fans are calling the WNBA a straight-up clown show. So what happened, and why is the league targeting its most valuable player? Let's break it all down.
Well, Caitlin Clark got fined, folks. Yeah, I can't believe this is real. Right here, Caitlin Clark said she was fined $200 for commenting, quote, "Refs couldn't stop us."
The Indiana Fever weren't even supposed to be here. Let's be real. This team was dead last just a season ago. But somehow, against all odds, they pulled off one of the biggest upsets of the playoffs, knocking out the Atlanta Dream and punching their ticket to the semifinals. It should have been a feel-good moment, the kind of underdog story the WNBA desperately needs. But instead of headlines celebrating the Fever's grit and Caitlin Clark's leadership, the spotlight shifted to something else entirely: the league's atrocious officiating.
Especially when it comes to the WNBA and their officiating, is of course how atrocious it is. Whether it's just allowing players to get the ever-loving crap beat out of them, Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, the list goes on and on.
Because here's the ugly truth, it wasn't just one bad call. Fans have been watching all season as refs let players like Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham get absolutely beaten down on the court, night after night, with almost no protection. By the end of this game, it felt less like basketball and more like survival. And that's where this whole mess really begins.
Now, we know all season long the WNBA referees has been the biggest burden upon us, bro. I mean, going back to the first playoff game versus the Dream had us like, damn, bro, the referees just gonna do us like that.
If you've been watching the WNBA this season, you already know. The officiating hasn't just been bad, it's been downright embarrassing. We're not talking about a couple of missed calls here and there. No, this has been a full-on circus of inconsistency, where players are allowed to get beaten down like it's a street fight instead of a professional basketball game. And who's taken the brunt of it? Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. Game after game, these two have been targeted, shoved, elbowed, hacked, you name it. The refs just stand there, staring at the action like they're watching a different sport entirely. Fans are left yelling at their TVs, wondering how this is even allowed at the so-called professional level.
Many WNBA fans are calling out the referee problem, and they are demanding answers and they are demanding changes.
Caitlin Clark especially has become the punching bag of the league. She's the rookie who brings the cameras, the fans, and the ratings, yet she's the one getting shoved to the hardwood with no call. She's the one limping to the bench while the officials shrug it off. And here's the worst part. Even when reporters confirmed Clark was technically healthy enough to play, she still wasn't being allowed back on the court because of how badly she's been beaten down all season.
There's been so many things, so many players calling out the referees, so many players calling out the physicality, so many players getting injured this season, from superstars to players on the bench.
And Sophie Cunningham? Same story. She's tough, fiery, and outspoken, but instead of being recognized as one of the WNBA's rising stars, she's been left battered on the floor, fined for speaking out, and turned into the league's running joke. This is the pattern, and fans see it clear as day. The WNBA has zero interest in protecting its stars. Instead, it looks like the league is more focused on silencing them. And that's exactly what happened the moment Caitlin Clark decided to speak her mind. After the Fever's massive upset win, Caitlin Clark could have played it safe. She could have just dropped a great team win and moved on. But Clark isn't wired that way. She's fiery, competitive, and not afraid to say what fans are already screaming from their couches. So she pulled out her phone, hopped on Instagram, and typed 6 little words that sent shockwaves through the league. Refs couldn't stop us.
The hate is real. The hate is real, Kathy. I see you hating on us from a mile away, Kathy Engelbert. We all see it. You out here trying to find Caitlin Clark. You out here finding the one person who's actually bringing money into this league. What?
That's it. That's all she said. No rant, no swearing, no personal attack. Just a statement that perfectly summed up the game. The Fever were too good, too tough, and too determined for even the officials to derail them. And let's be honest, she wasn't lying. If you watched that game, you saw it. Clark and her teammates were hacked, shoved, and knocked around while the referees swallowed their whistles. Yet they still pulled off the win. Her post wasn't just celebration, it was truth. But here's the problem. Truth is dangerous in the WNBA. This league treats officiating like a sacred cow. You don't talk about it. You don't joke about it. You don't even hint at it. And when Clark posted those 6 words, she stepped right into forbidden territory. The irony? If an NBA player had posted the same thing, it would have gone viral in seconds, celebrated as confidence and swagger. ESPN would have been playing it on repeat. But in the WNBA, that one Instagram post was treated like a federal crime. Fans saw it as Caitlin being bold, defiant, and authentic. The league saw it as an attack on their authority, and that's when things got ugly. And just like that, the hammer came down. The WNBA announced that Caitlin Clark was being fined for her Instagram post, $200 gone, just for daring to type out 6 harmless words. Now, I know what some people will say. $200? That's nothing. She probably spends more than that on coffee. And sure, the money isn't the issue. Caitlin isn't hurting over $200. But that's not why fans are furious. The outrage comes from what this fine represents. Because let's be clear, this wasn't about money. It was about control. The league wanted to make an example out of Caitlin, to remind every single player that officiating is off limits. You can drop 40 points on the court, you can get hacked and shoved all game long, but the moment you so much as hint that the refs aren't perfect, boom, here comes a fine. The absurdity of it all is almost laughable. Clark didn't insult anyone, didn't throw a tantrum, didn't curse or call names. She dropped one of the tamest, most common sports trash talk lines you'll ever hear. Refs couldn't stop us. And somehow, the WNBA decided that was enough to warrant punishment. The move instantly backfired. Fans called the league petty. Reporters mocked the decision. Social media lit up with people calling it a clown show. Instead of celebrating the Fever's playoff run, the WNBA turned the spotlight on its own incompetence. Once again, they proved they'd rather silence their biggest star than actually fix the officiating problems that everyone sees. And Caitlin herself? She didn't cry about it, she didn't back down, she actually leaned into it, joking that the fine would just make her team's bench mob even rowdier the next night. In other words, the WNBA tried to shut her up, and she turned it into fuel. But she wasn't the only one laughing. Sophie Cunningham saw what happened and decided to pile on, with some jokes that made the league look even worse. When news broke about Caitlin Clark's fine, fans were outraged. But Sophie Cunningham? She couldn't resist cracking a joke. Cunningham jumped on social media and poked fun at the situation, basically saying the $200 fine was so ridiculous that they might as well start a GoFundMe to help Clark pay it off. It was pure sarcasm, and fans ate it up. Because Sophie wasn't just joking, she was pointing out how absurd this whole thing really was. $200 isn't breaking Caitlin's bank, but the fact that the league thought this was worth punishing is the real comedy here. Sophie's joke landed because it highlighted exactly what everyone else was already thinking. Really, WNBA? This is the hill you want to die on? But this wasn't just about Caitlin. Cunningham herself knows what it's like to be fined by the league. She's been hit multiple times, not for dirty plays or major violations, but simply for being outspoken, for showing personality, for daring to challenge the system. So when she made that GoFundMe joke, it wasn't just humor. It was a shot at the league's hypocrisy. Here you have 2 of the WNBA's most marketable players, both bringing in attention, both giving the league the headlines it desperately craves. And the league's response is to slap fines on them for being human, for being entertaining, for being real. And Sophie's joke, as lighthearted as it was, made the WNBA look even more out of touch. Instead of letting players build rivalries and personality like every other successful sports league, the WNBA seems obsessed with cracking down. It's no wonder fans are calling it a clown show. But here's the bigger question. Why is the league so determined to make examples out of its own stars? At this point, you've got to ask, what is the WNBA's deal with targeting its own stars? Seriously, it's starting to feel less like a league and more like a bizarre obsession. Caitlin Clark drops one playful Instagram post? FINED. Sophie Cunningham shows personality on social media? FINED. These aren't role players nobody's heard of. These are the very women bringing eyeballs to the WNBA. And instead of celebrating them, the league seems dead set on keeping them in check. And it's not just the fines. Look at the officiating. Time after time, Clark and Cunningham are the ones taking the hardest hits, getting knocked around like tackling dummies, while refs stand there acting like nothing happened. Then, when those players finally speak up, when they give fans the authenticity and fire that makes sports fun, the league swoops in with punishment. It's almost like the WNBA would rather its stars stay quiet, bruised, and invisible than outspoken and entertaining. Compare this to other leagues. The NBA bends over backwards for its stars. Think about how many times LeBron James or Steph Curry have worked the refs during a game, jawed in press conferences, or dropped not-so-subtle shots on social media. Do they get fined? Almost never. Why? Because the NBA understands its stars are the product. The NFL practically builds its entire empire around quarterbacks, protecting them at all costs, promoting them endlessly, knowing that star power is what drives the business. But in the WNBA, it's the opposite. The league treats Caitlin Clark, their biggest draw since the league was founded, like she's disposable, like she's a rookie who needs to be put in her place. And that attitude has consequences. Fans see the petty fines, they see the lack of protection. They see a league that seems more concerned with flexing its power than actually building the game. And here's the kicker. Every time the WNBA fines Caitlin or Sophie, it doesn't make fans respect the league more. It makes them laugh at it. It makes headlines about clown show leadership. It turns every fine into proof that the people in charge are out of touch, insecure, and more focused on control than growth. Because let's be honest, does a $200 fine really change anything? Number. But it sends a very clear signal. The league would rather silence its stars than admit its officials are a problem. That's not discipline. That's obsession. And even players inside the Fever locker room have picked up on how strange this dynamic is. Just ask Aaliyah Boston, who's had her own surprising perspective on Caitlin Clark, going all the way back to college. To really understand how strange all of this is, you've got to hear from someone who actually shares the locker room with Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston. Now, Boston is no stranger to the spotlight herself. She was the #1 overall pick just last year, a national champion, and one of the most dominant college players of her generation. And back in 2023, she and Clark were on opposite sides of one of the biggest Final Four matchups in women's basketball history. Boston's undefeated South Carolina Gamecocks ran into Caitlin Clark's Iowa Hawkeyes, and Clark dropped an absolutely ridiculous stat line: 41 points, 8 assists, and 6 rebounds. She torched them, handed Boston her first major college loss of that season, and put Iowa in the national championship game. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement, and Boston admitted she felt it. On Sue Bird's podcast, she laughed about it, saying, "Caitlin, I just want to say I'm really upset that you did what you did in that Final Four game. You didn't have to go for 40 on our dome." That's the kind of competitive respect Clark has commanded since day one. Even the players who had to suffer through her dominance can't help but acknowledge it. And now, here they are, teammates on the Fever, trying to push this once bottom-feeding team into real contention. But here's where things get weird. Instead of celebrating the fact that the Fever have 2 generational talents on the same roster, Clark and Boston, the league almost seems to pit them against each other. Reporters hype up Boston and Kelsey Mitchell while downplaying Clark, as if praising one means dragging the other down. Never mind the fact that without Caitlyn's 8 wins this season, the Fever wouldn't have even made the playoffs. So while Boston's comments about Clark were playful, they also highlight the bigger point. Caitlyn has been that player for years now. From college to the pros, she's the one opponents fear, the one teammates rally around, and the one the league should be putting front and center. Instead, the WNBA is treating her like a problem. And that contradiction, celebrating her talent on the one hand, but fining her for speaking out on the other, is exactly why fans are calling this league a complete clown show. And this is the bottom line. Instead of celebrating Caitlyn Clark's playoff heroics, the WNBA made the headline about a $200 fine. Instead of protecting stars like Clark and Sophie Cunningham, they punish them for speaking the truth. Fans aren't blind. They see the bad officiating, the petty fines, the obsession with control. That's why more and more people are calling the WNBA a clown show. Because every time the league silences its biggest star, it proves the real problem isn't the refs or the players or even the competition. The real problem is the league itself.